Workers in helmets and tactical vests tearing down a Confederate memorial in New Orleans.
I say it's better for us to take them down, and then we can move forward into the 21st century.
This is the history of our area. You can't change it by pulling down monuments.
Take them down! Take them down!
History is history.
We're going to stand for what we believe in.
We say that this is a cowardice, that this is happening in the middle of the night.
Removing it from the spot where it had stood for more than a century.
We will no longer allow the Confederacy to literally be put on a pedestal in the heart of our city.
The Big Easy is struggling with a difficult past.
New Orleans was the largest city in the southern states during the Civil War. Now a vibrant, lively, cosmopolitan city where diversity is widely accepted, it was once an essential part of the Confederate States of America. It acted as an important trading port along the Mississippi River, as well as a major source for military supplies and agricultural harvests. The city is most remembered as a turning point in the war due to its capture by the Union in 1862, striking a major blow to the Confederacy. However, the locals were proud and loyal people, and after the war, a few monuments of notable Confederate men were erected in the city. Pgt Beauregard, most known for shooting the first shots on Fort Sumter, was born in New Orleans. During the war, he commanded armies for the Confederacy with Braxton Bragg. He was respected locally not just for his military prowess, but his history here also led local people to look up to him.
I think there was a lot of sort of romance associated with Beauregard because of he was seen as a gentleman of the very best family. After the war, he becomes a prominent citizen here in New Orleans.
This local attachment to Beauregard would eventually lead to the unveiling of his statue in 1915. Though Beauregard was a successful man of his time, even more prominent figures of the war were memorialized. Robert E. Lee was best known as the Supreme Commander of the Confederate Forces, one of the 5 full generals in the Confederate Army. Unlike Beauregard, Lee wasn't revered in Louisiana for local relation.
Robert E. Lee didn't have a strong connection personally to Louisiana. He certainly had come through here as a young engineer officer in the United States Army, doing surveys of Mississippi River forts.
Lee was more respected for what he represented.
Certainly people who had Confederate sympathies here in New Orleans would have venerated him as a hero of their vanquished order and a man who exemplified the very best of the Confederacy.
His statue was completed and placed in Lee Circle, which was formerly known as Tivoli Circle, in 1884. There was also a monument of Jefferson Davis erected and unveiled in 1915. Though he was the president of the Confederate States, he didn't have much local relevance until very late in his life.
Like Robert E. Lee, even though he wasn't a Louisianan or a New Orleanian, people with those sympathies thought well of him. What may have served to connect Davis more to the people of New Orleans was that he actually died here in the city and was laid in state here. There was a huge funeral procession. But it isn't until many years later that the Jefferson Davis Monument is erected.
One of these monuments was made for an event which occurred on New Orleans streets. The Battle of Liberty Place, also known as the Battle of Canal Street, took place a decade after the Civil War.
The core problem, as far as many local Southern Democrats were concerned, was the contested election of 1872, where the Republican candidate, William Kellogg, wins over the Democrat, Samuel McEnery. The federal government sort of backed Kellogg's claim to the governor's seat. Ulysses Grant weighs in favor of Kellogg, and that just outraged local Democrats, who of course weren't about to accept, their former inveterate enemy, Ulysses Grant.
So, local Democrats allied with the Crescent City White League, a white supremacist paramilitary group with a mission to restore white power and antebellum order. The two groups worked together to move in a governor of their choice by force. The White League held control of the city for 3 days before federal troops came in and restored power.
Local people here, sort of Democrat-leaning former Confederate sympathizers glorified the event, felt that it was a moment of shining triumph on the part of rightness and justice, and newspaper editorials almost right away began advocating for a monument for the Battle of Liberty Place.
The monument was erected in 1891. The meaning of these monuments changed as over a century of time passed since the Civil War. Local perceptions shifted, and people became polarized on the subject of Confederate monuments. People began to see these monuments as representative of a shameful, racist time in New Orleans history. This led to two opposing sides of a developing conflict. What do we do with the Confederate monuments? One side believed that these monuments need to be destroyed. They are in prominent places in our city and make it seem as if we still value the ideas of the racists pre-Civil War South. These men are no longer figures to look up to. The other side thought that the monuments should remain where they are. They are still a part of our history, and we can't just erase the unlikable parts of our history. We can only see it as a lesson learned and be proud that we've progressed since then. Democrat Mitch Landrieu had been the mayor of New Orleans since 2010. His administration pushed through on a decision for the Confederate monuments: remove and relocate.
As I understand it, part of the way that the Landrieu administration was selling the removal of the monuments was that they could be erected in a park that was not so public, not a prominent municipal space, but maybe a private park or an area that where they could be displayed and interpreted in an appropriate way.
Relocation was a perfect compromise. It allowed the monuments to stay intact and the city to preserve its history without seemingly promoting outdated and horrific ideals as representative of the local people now. The monuments were all removed in 2017. However, these removals were still controversial and met with much pushback.
The first time I heard about Mayor Mitch Landrieu's decision to try to take down historic monuments, I was very frustrated. The monuments represented to me part of history. And all of that history, just like the French Quarter, just like the streetcars, all of that should be preserved because it makes New Orleans unique, it makes New Orleans a tourist destination, it all makes New Orleans important, and it's part of what makes New Orleans what it is.
Many protests occurred due to the high tension and strong opinions of the local people in regards to this matter.
Shame! 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 Shame!
The rebel flag wavers are out there waving Confederate flags. The white supremacists are out there claiming white supremacy. There's another group called Take 'Em Down that wants to take down all statues and monuments in New Orleans. So I saw both of the extremists out there.
Even today, despite the removals all being completed, new locations for these monuments are still being debated.
As we know, the statues ended up in a city impound yard, just sitting, out in the open.
But they shouldn't be, left in a junkyard. They shouldn't be put somewhere that is shameful, because I don't think that's respectful and that's proper. So they should be placed somewhere, at the least, in a respectful and honorable location.
The monuments remain there today, with their future permanent locations left to be decided by the next mayor of New Orleans.
I will say that I'm a historian and I try to look at objects that are artifacts of the past in a dispassionate way. I would like to see a responsible plan for curation in a way that they can be interpreted for what they are accurately. And that's going to require some work on many people's part to make happen.
New Orleans can stand as an example to the rest of the nation. Confederate monuments are not a new issue. Statues of former leaders have been defaced and destroyed throughout history, even in ancient Egypt. And now, there are multiple varying debates in different states across the U.S. on just what should be done with many other Confederate statues like the ones in New Orleans. The relocation compromise can be a viable solution for many of these states.
Now is the time to send a new message to the next generation of New Orleanians. A message about the future, about the next 300 years and beyond. Let us not miss this opportunity in New Orleans, and let us help the rest of America do the same, because now is a time for choosing.